Good morning, students. It is our fourth lecture on the text of Samuel Johnson's London. And in our previous discussion, we have dealt with the political background of London and at the same time the introductory perspectives. Now, let us move towards the text of London, the epigraph, and the fundamental focus towards the textual sections. In the first lecture, I have mentioned that this particular text, London, is considered to be a poem that was written in imitation of the third satire of Juvenal. And I was also discussing on how so far, that means what are the fundamental focus of this particular text, that is the third satire of Juvenal, and how so far this particular text can be considered to be an imitation to the satire of Juvenal. There I was mentioning about the particular character, that is Ambricius, and as in this particular slide you can see that here it is being mentioned that the story of the satire speaks itself, that Ambricius, the supposed friend of Juvenal and himself a poet, is leaving Rome. And here you can find that in place of Rome there is the particular reference to London, and returning to Cumae or Came. Our author accompanies him out of town. Before they take leave of each, Ambricius tells his friend the reasons which oblige him to lead a private life in an obscure place. He complains that an honest man cannot get his bread at Rome, that none but flatterers make their fortunes there, that Grecians and their foreigners, other foreigners, raise themselves by those sordid arts which describes and against which he bitterly inveighs. He reckons up the several inconveniences which arise from a city life, and the many dangers which attend it, upbraids the nobleman with covetousness for not rewarding good poets, and arraigns the government for starving them. So fundamentally, it was the particular kind of reference that I have taken from the satires of Decimus Junius Juvenalis, translated into English verse by Mr. John Dryden. So now let us move towards the particular section, that is the text and its epigraph. You will find that in this particular epigraph, as it has been mentioned, there it is written that quis ineptae tam patientia urbis, tam feras at tenit se. So it is taken from Juvenal. And what does it mean? In English, it actually signifies, I have mentioned two particular references where you can find these are two actually translations from the satire of Juvenal. Here it has been written that who can endure this monstrous city? Who is so iron-willed he can bear it? So it is one particular description, it is one particular, you can find here that I am taking from Brady's translation of Juvenal's satire, and it has been mentioned that who can endure this monstrous city? What does it mean? Who can endure this monstrous city? So ultimately you will find that so far of this particular text is concerned, we can find that there is a particular reference to the monstrosity of the city. So whenever you will think of Juvenal, as I mentioned, that it was actually referring to Rome. But now we have to concentrate on this particular poem, that is London. So therefore, Rome has to be transferred into the London, obviously. And when there is the speaker, you will find that it is Ambricius who is speaking in Juvenal's third satire. Now you can find in place of Ambricius, here is Thales who is speaking this line. So who can endure this monstrous city? Who is so iron-willed he can bear it? That means to bear Rome here, as it has been mentioned in the satire of Juvenal, that to bear Rome in its proper form, because you see that Rome has to be treated as a particular place which is completely being in its corruption. So ultimately, we'll find the same kind of corruption has to be present in London. Here in this particular text that is edited by Harriet Raghunathan, that is Worldview edition, I will refer to Harriet Raghunathan's word notes, okay, regarding this particular text. Here also he quotes these lines. So for who, however he steels himself, can bear the absurdity of this city and restrain his rage. So ultimately you will find the same thing, that the endurance, ultimately it is needed. It cannot be endured, you see. The rage cannot be restrained. That means if you have to face London in its proper form, if you have to face London in its, to some extent degenerated and decadent condition. The particular form of corruption that is prevailing throughout London, so the political representations and the political situation of London at the time, you cannot concentrate on, or you cannot bear them any longer. So that particular thing is being described in this particular epigraph. The question certainly arises, what does an epigraph do? That means, what do you mean by an epigraph? And what is the fundamental significance of an epigraph? You will find that the term, if you go through the dictionary, that is the Dictionary of Literary Terms by M.H. Abrams, or maybe in any other form, you will find that epigraph, this particular term, is associated, or it actually indicates any particular line or any particular reference. It may be a catchphrase, or maybe a sentence, or maybe a particular portion that actually indicates, that can actually relate your present text with the ancient one. Why? Because the temperament of the ancient text and the basic ethos of that particular text can be reciprocated, can be related with your modern one. That means whenever you are using any particular epigraph, you need to make a kind of a relation between these two texts. And here you will find that the epigraph is taken from the satire by Juvenal. And in the same way, Samuel Johnson is incorporating his text, that is London, with Juvenalian text. So next, let us begin with the text. It is the textual analysis, and in this particular discussion, I will go towards from line number 1 to line number 34, because here you will find it is the introductory part, where the speaker is probably, it is not Thales, but it might be Samuel Johnson himself, or maybe in any poet persona that Samuel Johnson is creating here. Johnson is writing, you see, here it has been written that though grief and fondness in my breast rebel. In my last discussion, I have mentioned that what was the political scenario, what was the political condition where Johnson was beginning his particular poem, that is London. The political scenario, the typical anti-Whig temperament in Samuel Johnson, the typical pro-Jacobite tendency in him, and as he was against the typical Hanoverian dynasty. So fundamentally, you will find that in Johnsonian canon of literature, specifically this particular poem that is London, and at the same time, it is Vanity of Human Wishes, you will find that this typical pro-Jacobite temperament is being in work, okay, fundamentally. And that is why he conceptualizes that London, in the present scenario where the Walpole is ruling, when George II is ruling, this is not to be considered to be an ideal place to live in. So therefore he begins with this particular reference. The situation is Thales is retiring from London. Thales is moving far from London and going to any other places. It might be Ireland or Scotland, or maybe in any other place. So fundamentally you will find the poem begins with two particular words. One is grief and the second one is fondness. You will find that somehow, so far as Johnsonian temperament is concerned, you will find that the two terms is actually referring to the temperament of this particular speaker. He says that though grief and fondness in my breast rebel. So it is the rebellious temperament that is being worked. And grief and fondness. Why? Because the grief, because it is certainly deteriorating. London is deteriorating. You will find that in London, there is a particular kind of decadence is being perceptible. And so far as fondness is considered, you'll find that fondness for Thales, fondness for London in its ancient form. That's when you will find that fundamentally the House of the Stuarts was ruling. So here it has been mentioned that the grief and fondness in my breast rebel when injured Thales bids the town farewell. Here, the term Thales, but it should be pronounced as Thales. Yes. In Juvenal's third satire, Ambrosius is the friend leaving Rome. The name Thales may suggest the lyric poet of 650 BC, who was called Lycurgus, the legendary legislator of Sparta, to help him civilize the people and teach them honesty and civic duty. Though Johnson was reported to have said that by Thales he did not mean any particular person, there has been much debate on this point since Sir John Hawkins noted the parallel between Thales and the impoverished and resentful poet Richard Savage. Okay, I'm reading from Harriet Raghunathan's note of this particular text, and it is in the Worldview edition, Worldview publication. Savage, as it has been mentioned, that Savage was certainly a friend of Johnson's in 1738. and did leave London for Wales in July 1739. 16 months after London was published. However, there is no evidence that Savage was planning to leave as early as 1738, nor that Johnson intended Thales as a portrait of Savage. So you will find that who is this Thales? Fundamental questions, fundamental debates actually arose regarding the similarities between Savage and Thales. But ultimately, we'll find that so far as the timeline is considered, so far as the fundamental historicity is concerned, you will find that there is no certain reference of this particular similarity, that it cannot prove that Thales is Savage, obviously. So here he says that when injured Thales bids the town farewell. Why injured? What is the form of injury that he is trying to portray? And ultimately, you will find that this particular injury is referring to the certain kind of the Thales is to some extent a particular character that can be related with Ambrosius. True. But at the same time, you can find that Thales is actually referring to the temperamental aspects of Samuel Johnson, and why Samuel Johnson was injured just because of the certain kind of decadence that is prevailing in England, the political, religious, and at the same time the social differences regarding the temperament of Samuel Johnson, and at the same time that is prevailing throughout London at the time. So when injured Thales bids the town farewell, yet still my calmer thoughts his choice commend. I praise the hermit, but regret the friend. So you see, the two terms have been there. The first term is hermit, and the second term is friend. Who is the hermit? You will find that in this particular line, that is, I praise the hermit. Johnson's view on hermits are very considerably. He wrote in the journal of a tour to the Hebrides. It has been written by Boswell. Here it has been written that I have never read of a hermit, but in imagination I kiss his feet, he said at St. Andrews in Scotland. So there are ample provisions you will find that Johnson is referring to hermit. So here you will find that so far as the dictionary is considered or concerned, you will find that a hermit is a solitary person, probably, who retires from society to contemplation and devotion. So here you will find that Thales is actually retiring from London. So you can find the typical term hermit is being referred to Thales. Why? Because he is actually moving far from London and the typical pattern of life that he was in. But ultimately, we'll find I praise the hermit. Why? Because the decision cannot be negated. True. Because the particular condition of London is not to be considered as good at that moment. So just like a hermit who can feel better, who can think better, Thales is preparing to leave London. But I regret the friend. Why? Because I will certainly feel the kind of a separation between the friends, between two friends, you see, that is Thales and Johnson at this moment, obviously. So here he says that I praise the hermit but regret the friend. Who? The friend, obviously, and the hermit, obviously, who now resolves from vice and London far, okay, to breathe in distant fields a purer air. So you will find what is the distant field that is being pointed out. Here, the distant fields are actually referring to the particular positions where Thales is retiring towards, you see. That means from London, he's retiring towards a particular place. It may be Scotland, it may be Ireland. That means anything apart from England at the time. So here it says that resolved at lane from vice and London far. Okay, vice and London, you see, the two terms have been incorporated in a single line. Okay, so ultimately, when these particular two terms have been related in a particular reference, but ultimately, if vice is being considered to be some abstract concept and London is a place, that means the vice and London, it is actually considered as vicious London to some extent. It's a figure of speech, obviously, where you will find that London is being torn, London is being associated with vices at the time. It is the vicious London far. To breathe in distant fields a purer air. The distant fields are obviously apart from London, apart from any particular land in England. It may refer to the purer air. So the fundamental question certainly arises, if something is being referred as purer, so far as the distant places are concerned, then you will find that London is suffering from different kinds of impurities. You see, it is not to be considered as pure. And fixed on Cambria's solitary shore. What is Cambria? This is the particular place that have been mentioned. Cambria is Wales. True. So, and fixed on Cambria's solitary shore, give to Saint David one true Britain more. So here, multiple things have to be stated. You will find that Saint David, that has been considered that Saint David is the patron saint of Wales. True, as it has been mentioned. But so far as the term, that is true Britain, is considered, in my last lecture, I have mentioned some of the terms that have been used by the malcontents against George II. Okay, and there was a particular reference to true Britons. I have referred to the Jacobites, the pro-Jacobites or Jacobites, who were with the particular view that the Hanoverian dynasty, that is the rulers from George I and up to the later parts you see up to Queen Victoria. It has been considered by them the Stuarts are the original rulers of England. They have the legal rights to set their states to be a ruler. But ultimately, they considered that the Hanoverian dynasty cannot be considered to be the true descendant of the Stuarts. So they do not have the particular kind of capability of ruling London, of ruling England at the time. So ultimately, the question certainly arises: what does the true Britain, this particular term, is signifying? It is actually referring to the consideration of ethnic purity. As I've mentioned in my last lecture, that there was a particular possibility of a people, a group of people, the young patriots, remember, that who are actually opposing George II and the Hanoverian dynasty, and at the same time Walpole. So fundamentally, you will find that by referring to the term true Britain, which was a catchphrase of the time, Johnson is actually carrying the fundamental basis of that particular temperament. Yes, he is going to do so. In the Harriet Raghunathan's note, it has been written that neither the Roman nor the Anglo-Saxon invaders of Britain extended their conquests into Wales or Scotland. These areas thus remained strongholds of the ancient British tribes. The phrase was also the title of the Jacobite Journal of 1723 and 24, and was used in contemporary politics by opponents of Walpole. In his virulently anti-Hanoverian and anti-Walpole murmur nonsense, as I mentioned in my last lecture, of 1739, Johnson gives himself the name Probus Britannicus, or True Britain. Thales is a true Briton, as we can see, in the sense that he is disguised by the decline of British liberty and the cultural influence of French manners in London. So that is the reason why the true Briton, this particular term, is being conceptualized here. Then it has been written that for who would leave unbribed Hibernia's land? What is Hibernia? Hibernia is Ireland, obviously. So here Johnson is trying to propagate that without bribe, without being forced, to by anything, you see that nobody can leave Hibernia's land, that is Scotland or Ireland here. The Latin word actually suggests wintry or stormy, that is Hibernia, obviously, while the rocks of Scotland suggest a hostile or barren country. Boswell took these lines to show Johnson's prejudice against Scotland and Ireland. Johnson himself would not have needed any bribe to make him change Ireland for London. Okay, so the similar kind of thing is being there. However, exaggeration is a common satirical device. The function of these lines in the poem is to suggest that the vices of the city make it far more intolerable than living in the country, even in the most primitive regions where hunger is common. Johnson knew very well that life was hard for the poor in these areas, and far from being the scenes of flowery felicity printed by the poets. So fundamentally, he says that for who would leave unbribed Hibernia's land, or change the rocks of Scotland for the strand? Here, strand is actually being referred to the stranded place, that is London. There none are swept by sudden fate away, but all whom hunger spares and with age decay. So these are the references you see that I have mentioned just now. That there is the reference of hunger, there is the reference of sudden fate, there is the reference of age. You see, these are the things with which these flowery places, quote unquote flowery places that have been mentioned by the poets or romantic poets in the later part, or maybe the romantic authors. But ultimately, you will find that this is a particular place where, in spite of difficulties, you want to be in. So he says that here, with this particular term here, it is actually referring to London at the time. So here, malice, rapine, you see, accident, conspire. So three terms have been side by side mentioned: malice, rapine, accident. Note the use of the abstract nouns here, personified, since they conspire against you. So what it says, malice, maliciousness, obviously you know, rapine, that is violent seizure of one's property, an accident, these are actually taken place. So ultimately you will find that with these terms, Johnson is trying to refer to various kinds of problems and various kinds of tussles that is going on within London at the time. So here says that here in London, malice, rapine, accident, conspire. And now a rabble rages, you see. Rabble means a disorderly crowd who doesn't follow anything. So now a rabble rages, now a fire. So again, the rabble and fire, both these terms, it is a zeugma, obviously, it's a figure of speech. Here you can find that the rabble and fire have been incorporated into a single one. Why? Because the fire is actually happening, the setting fire to multiple places. And this particular fire is also present within these rebels, that is the persons or disorderly crowd. The crowds, you see, the mob, obviously. And now a rebel rages, now a fire. Their ambush here, relentless ruffian slay. So actually, you will find that these are the terms that Johnson is referring to describe London in the present scenario. There you can find that malice is present, rapine is present, accident is present, conspiracies are there, rebels are raging, you see, the fire is being set to anything, the ambushes are there, the political stripes, you see the different kinds of political stripes, the tussles between the Whigs and the Tories, the tussles between the royalists or the courts, between the country people. Okay, so everywhere you can find the similar kind of thing is being incorporated. So here it says, and now a rebel rages, now a fire. Their ambush here, ambush, ambush is secret kind of, you see the post where soldiers and assassins are placed in order to fall unexpectedly upon an enemy. Okay, the rapines, you see, the ruffians, the cutthroats, obviously, the murderers. So there was not yet a police force in London at the time, and the streets were unsafe. Johnson himself used to carry a club, okay, for self-defense. So ultimately, you will find that this is the particular situation of London during this time. So here it says that, and now a rebel rages, now a fire. Their ambush here, relentless ruffians lay, and here the fell attorney prowls for prey. Here, attorney, you see that this is actually being referred to a kind of lawyer who served writs or acted for other persons in the courts of common law. Said why it's called fell attorney? Just because it is actually referring to barbarous, inhuman, and cruel. Certainly, Johnson is trying to refer to a group of the attorneys or lawyers who are wandering for prey, P-R-E-Y, you see. That means everywhere you can find the similar kind of techniques, similar kind of incorporations have been made. That everywhere in the name of law, in the name of, you see, order and balance, a certain kind of break is being perceptible in that particular regime of the Hanoverian dynasty, as it has been mentioned by Johnson. So there is no order. It is completely form of disorder that is prevailing within London. So that particular image, that particular portraiture is being made by Johnson here in these lines. So here malice, rapine, accident, conspire, and now a rabble rages, and now a fire. Their ambush here, relentless ruffian slay, and here the fell attorney prowls, that is wander, W-A-N-D here, wander for prey. Here falling houses, thunder on your head. Okay, and here a female atheist talks you dead. Again, the reference to falling houses, and the female atheist, the person who doesn't follow any particular rule. You will find the typical Anglican view that is being present in Johnson. That particular temperament is pointing towards the personalities. It is not being properly mentioned that who is this person, female or atheist, but rather we can ascribe to any person, any political figure who doesn't follow anything religious, you see. Okay, that's why she is being considered as atheist. So with the falling houses that is thundering on your head, or maybe the female atheist that talks you dead, the particular kind of deterioration or particular kind of, you see, the decadence is being completed here in these lines. Then it says that while Thales waits the wherry that contains of dissipated wealth, the small remains. So you will find that beside the river of Thames, here you can find the Thales, that is the person to whom it has been written. And ultimately you will find that from line number 35, we can find the speeches of Thales being incorporated. And here it has been written that by Thales waits the wherry. Actually, you should read that while Thales waits for the wherry, because the wherry is actually referring to a kind of a boat, you see. So while Thales waits for the wherry that contains of dissipated wealth, the small remains. That means why it's dissipated? Because when you are against the rulers, okay, when you are against the power, then ultimately you will find that everything will be snatched from you, right? In the name of the excise bill of 1733, as I mentioned earlier in my previous lecture, that the people, okay, the rulers and their official personages, they actually entered at any premises, okay, and searched them and grabbed them and left people without any penny. So here the same incorporation has been made. So while Thales awaits or waits for the wherry that contains of dissipated wealth, you see, dissipated wealth, and the small remains, okay, on Thames's banks, that is the river, in silent thought he stood. Okay, you know, at the very last moment you are thinking about the positive temperaments that is still prevailing obviously within your mind. Suppose when you are just separating yourself from your land, from your country, from your house any longer, the beautiful memories of the past lives, you see, it actually it is crowded within your mind at that moment. So the same thing is incorporated here. It has been written that on Thames's banks in silent thought we stood, we, you see, we, that means Thales and the speaker, where Greenwich smiles. Why there is the reference to Greenwich? Because you will find that Greenwich is actually being referred to the birthplace of Queen Elizabeth. As I mentioned, that Johnson himself, just like Alexander Pope, Johnson himself was considered as a pro-Jacobite who was with the particular view that the Hanoverian kings are not apt or appropriate for ruling England any longer, because the ultimate focus had to be given to the Stuart dynasty, and there is a reference to Queen Elizabeth. And that's why the reign of Queen Elizabeth is being considered by Samuel Johnson as good and proper and better than the present scenario. So that's why the reference to Greenwich. Why? Because it was the birthplace of Queen Elizabeth I, and Greenwich is on the Thames a few miles east of London, and Johnson was staying there while writing this particular poem. So there is a particular topical association. That's why Johnson is referring to Greenwich here. So where Greenwich smiles upon the silver flood, obviously you will find the silver flood is referring to silver Thames. In many good poems in English literature, we can find the Thames have been incorporated as silver Thames, okay? So that's why it has been written that where Greenwich smiles upon the silver flood, struck, that is impressed with the seat, you read that it is the situation or maybe the sight that gave Eliza, that is Elizabeth, birth. You know, that is a reference to Greenwich. We kneel, we both, that means Thales and Samuel Johnson, we kneel and kiss the consecrated earth. Consecrated, this is a particular term that has been taken from Bible. It is a typical register of theology. Why the consecrated earth? Because here Queen Elizabeth ruled, you see. So ultimately, as a pro-Jacobite, they are always with the particular view that this is a place, this is a consecrated earth, this is a consecrated place where the rulers like Queen Elizabeth, rulers like James I, they actually being there. So ultimately, it has been written that we kneel, you see, and kiss the consecrated earth. In pleasing dreams, the blissful age renew. What is the blissful age? The blissful age is actually referring to that particular age where the Stuart dynasty was ruling. So it was the pleasing dream, you see, because you cannot feel that now, from now on, the Stuart dynasty will come again. It cannot be possible. So it is a kind of a dream, you see, pleasing dream, liberty, mind it. So in pleasing dreams, the blissful age renew and call Britannia's, okay, glories back to view. The Britannia's glories back to view, you will find the same incorporation has been made. Britannia, Britain, again, the concept of true Britain, and it is being referred as Queen Elizabeth's part, obviously. Then it says that behold her cross. What is the cross? You know that Queen Elizabeth is not to be considered as, cross that referred to Christianity. No, it is not that particular cross. Here you will find that the flag of England's navy showed the red cross of St. George on a white ground. This cross is now incorporated into the British Union Jack in the present scenario, along with the flags of St. Andrew of Scotland and St. Patrick of Ireland. So that particular cross is being referred here. So behold her cross, that is Queen Elizabeth's cross of the time. Triumphant on the main. Main, the main is actually referred to sea or ocean or anything. So behold her cross, triumphant on the main, the guard of commerce. Why? Because you will find that the navy actually guarded the merchant ships from pirates, okay, of other enemies. So behold her cross, triumphant on the sea or triumphant on the main, the guard of commerce and the dread of Spain. So that is the fundamental thing. As I mentioned earlier in my previous discussion, that there was a particular reference of that when Walpole is aiming at peace between Spain and England, but certainly the persons who are completely drunk with the typical nationalist opium, you see, they are particularly considerable regarding this, and they consider that when the particular truce, a particular kind of a peace between Spain and England, it is actually indicating towards the end of Britain or maybe the deterioration of Britain. So the dread of Spain, that particular term is being usefully or powerfully used here. So behold her cross, triumphant on the main, the guard of commerce and the dread of Spain. Ere, that is, these was before, you see. Masquerades debauched. What term of masquerades? Masquerades generally will find in the typical English scenario. Masquerades is indicating towards a masked dance, but at the same time, it is metaphorically representing difficult kinds of hypocrisies. Masks, you are wearing masks. That means you are hypocrite. That means what you feel and what you do, these are completely different from each other. So ultimately, you will find that Johnson is very much critical regarding the present scenario, regarding the typical political agenda of the time. And fundamentally, you will find that the masquerade is debauching or engulfing something. Okay, so before masquerades debauched, excise oppressed. Again, you will find the term like excise being incorporated. Why? Because it is actually indicating towards the excise bill of 1733. Again, so I have to refer to the dread of Spain again. As I mentioned earlier, that in earliest times, the English Navy had been the terror of Spain, as when Drake defeated the Spanish Armada in 1588. Johnson intends a contrast with the present policy of Walpole, which was to avoid war with Spain. The opposition to Walpole was deeply critical of this. Okay, the Treaty of Utrecht, which ended the War of Spanish Succession in 1713, had given British the right to import a number of African slaves into America. The British had hoped to trade directly without restriction with Spain's colonies in the Americas. But Spain resisted this and claimed the right to control the Caribbean Sea and search British ships. In 1738, the year of Johnson's poem, 12 British ships had recently disappeared in these waters. In 1731, the Spanish Coast Guard had cut off the ear of Jenkins, a British sea captain. He produced it in Parliament in March 1738 to assist the clamor for war against Spain. So fundamentally, you will find that the Spain is actually being referred to that. The masquerades, as I mentioned now, and the excise oppressed, as I mentioned, that the excise was a kind of a tax payable on the sale of certain commodities such as gin, tea, tobacco, etc. Walpole had tried in 1733 to introduce a bill increasing the excise. It was extremely unpopular, as the officers had the right to enter and search the premises where goods were stored. Johnson called excise, quote unquote, a hateful tax levied upon commodities, and adjudged not by common judges of property, but by wretches hired by those to whom excise is paid. So ultimately, you will find that all these things are actually indicating towards the deteriorating of the English honor. That means that is the fundamental line that Johnson is writing in the next line. It has been mentioned that before masquerades debauched, excise oppressed, or English honor grew a standing jest. That is, the honor has been turned into dishonor at the time. It is the kind of a jest that is being happening. So a transient calm the happy scenes bestowed, because the happy scenes of Queen Elizabeth's reign, or maybe the reign uh, by the Stuart dynasty, and it was a transient calm. Why? Because it is calmness and transient, that is short-lived. That means even in a minute it will vanish. And for a moment lull the sense of awe. That means every time, each and every time, you can find that something has been vanished from you, and it is a kind of a sense of awe that is present within you. At length awaking. So after that particular kind of a dream and memories, memories of liberty and memories of the past days, now it is the time for awakening. With contemptuous frown, the frowning is related to contempts. In the indignant Thales eyes the neighboring town, and then in a contemptuous frown, frowning a little, indignant Thales, that is angry Thales, eyes, that is, it's in a verb form, eyes the neighboring town. And what is the neighboring town? It is London. That means after that, it is up to line number 34, and you will find from next section, that is from line number 35, Thales will begin to speak, obviously. So that will be discussed in our next lecture. So today, up to this, thank you.